Okay, next is the big man. This is the guy I like to hang out with occasionally. He carries a gun.
I'm glad someone
So let's welcome Dave Webster, and he's going to talk about bears and bear aware and anything else, right?
You bet.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, glad to see everybody here again. Just wanted to thank Brenda and the members of the lake that participated in Bear Aware this year. It's a great program, and obviously it's one that's going to be pretty important, I think, as the community moves forward here with some of the upcoming bear issues. And the support was great, and as Brenda's slides showed, I think it was a great start to the program. And I hope that we can get more people involved as we move forward and make it even a bigger success. So just to start off, I just did want to thank Brenda and the folks that got involved with Bear Aware. That's what I'm going to kind of talk about today, is some of the history we had with bears this season. It was an unusually busy year at Christina Lake. I pulled some numbers off our system, and the average complaints received by the Conservation Officer Service for this area averages 33 complaints per year. We had years as 05, 06, we had 2 complaints from the lake. Up until this year, the busiest year we'd had was about 56, it was about 56 complaints back in 04. This year, we had 260 complaints from Christina Lake. Some theories on why that happened this year, and we can get into that a bit later. That number doesn't include the calls I received at home from people who personally knew me or had my contact information, or the people that wanted to, bump into my wife at the grocery store and let her know that there was a bear that needed to be dealt with. She should get a hold of me. So those numbers actually are probably quite a bit higher with the number of complaints that were reached by my office. Of those 256 complaints, we tried to monitor and action the severe cases where we felt that public safety and property damage were occurring, and we ended up destroying 24 black bears in Christina Lake this past season. My busiest year since I've been here, I arrived in 04. My busiest year was actually the year that I arrived prior to this, and I think we put 4 bears down in Christina Lake that year. And it was the busiest year. We had bears doing extensive property damage. We had physical damage to houses, bears attempting to gain entry into residences. We had decks being destroyed. We had outdoor equipment, fridges, freezers, things like that, completely destroyed. We had an issue, I know there's some folks from Westlake Drive. We had multiple vehicle break-ins, resulting in approximately $50,000 worth of vehicle damage on Westlake Drive. And those bears were definitely an issue. We stepped up our response as much as we could. We had officers, as many as 5 different officers from the local area. That would be Creston, as far away as Cranbrook, and the Cascar officers were helping to cover off and set and remove traps and deal with bear issues as they arose. Obviously, attractants were a big issue. Anywhere these bears could find food, they did, and in a lot of cases wouldn't move off that food source. The other thing that was interesting with the population dynamics we were dealing with here at the lake, of those bears that we removed, 18 of them were extremely large, healthy males. That is generally not what we deal with a problem bear population. When we're dealing with bears in urban settings, it's generally the 2 to 3 year old animals, just away from the parents, just kind of trying to figure things out. Potentially orphan cubs, just learning things on their own. And it's usually the younger animals that cause trouble. What we noticed was almost to an animal, we were dealing with extremely healthy, large males. And they generally don't exist in an area this size in those numbers. They wouldn't tolerate each other. So that was interesting. We had to employ different methods to try and deal with these critters. Some of them, like you say, would walk by a pile of food to try and break into a vehicle. They just did not care about bait, traps, anything. They would strictly see a vehicle as a food source. And we would notice even in some of the instances of damage that we investigated, we would find bear paw marks and muddy paw prints only around the door handles. That was the only place that they attempted to actually touch or get at the vehicle, because they knew that's how they could get to the door. We had one bear that eventually ended up getting inside the vehicle, they were able to open the doors and get into several vehicles. One bear got into a vehicle, and the door actually closed on the inside, and he was trapped inside, and it caused extensive. So it actually kind of looked like a bomb went off inside that van. So, those are some of the issues we're dealing with. The other issue that the lake faces, obviously, is that we have a high summer population of recreational users that come and stay in campgrounds and the different resorts, and that presents another set of issues for us because we constantly have an influx of people who aren't aware of the problems of the lake or the issues that we may be facing, and come up and next thing you know, you've got garbage being stored outside of tents or campers, or they're having their outside barbecues and just leaving those materials out. And we had a high instance of that this year, where a lot of the campgrounds down along the lake had very, very large male bears roaming through the campgrounds at midnight, 1 in the morning, looking for food, sniffing at tents, and things like that. Had no natural fear of people. Extremely hard to scare off. That was another issue that we were faced with this year. Normally, you can push a bear off. They just weren't doing that this year. A lot of the bears would actually even approach them. Even when I approach on scene, they literally just sit down in front of you and just stare at you, and you could not move them out of the area. So when we're dealing with bears like that, it's obviously a concern for us. There's, and I can answer some questions on this. Relocation is not an option for us, and that's from a biological standpoint. It's not based on funding or staffing or anything else. There's probably between 140 and 160,000 black bears in the province of British Columbia today. Every available piece of habitat is being utilized. And when we're dealing with bears in our urban areas, it's because most likely they've been pushed out of their natural areas through competition or lack of food. So when we're dealing with them in an urban area, it's because there isn't anything for them out in the wild at that point. There are some extenuating circumstances. We're dealing with one of those for lake right now, but generally that's what the cause of an urban bear becoming habituated is. Relocation usually means you have to take them a long ways away, so they won't come back. And if you are, you're putting them into an area that's probably already inhabited by a full complement of bears. And in the natural hierarchy of things, large dominant bears kill subordinate bears in the wild if they're in the same competition for food. That means that bear that we relocate then has to either make his own way or find food, and then he's put on the run. So generally we're finding, and through some of our research, that 90% of bears that are relocated are either killed or die within the first 2 weeks of that relocation. So it's not a solution at the back end. It may make people feel good. Bear's in a trap, he's hauled away, it's not our problem anymore. But it's a pretty miserable end for that animal. That's why we want to see problems mitigated at the front end, which is looking after our communities through programs such as Bear Aware, managing our attractants, trying to limit that contact with the bears. If they don't have food or can't get food on your property or around your residence, they're going to move on. And it does work. So there is some information here on Bear Aware. I encourage you to look at it, read it, try and become familiar, and it's a good program. The bears aren't going anywhere. We had a bad year this year. We're anticipating we may have another bad year next year. Even when population levels get to a regular level, we can anticipate to have animals in our community. They're not. So we need to know how to mitigate the involvement we have with them, and like you say, they're not going anywhere. But it is definitely something we can manage, and we can live with them. So, was there any questions about the bear issues in Christina Lake this year?
What do you do with the bear hides?
Generally, the animals are just returned back to the wild as carrion, so that the carcass is either dumped or taken to a landfill. We had one bear that was extraordinarily large. If you look at the bear's hide that we have at the back table here, that's about 11-inch skull on that bear, and that's measured across. The bear we took up not far from the golf course along the Trans-Canada Trail had a 22-inch skull, so he's twice that size. He was 550 pounds. That bear hide we kept, and we're going to use it for educational purposes. So sometime next year when we're doing this talk, I will have that hide here to show folks what some of the animals, the size of some of the animals we're dealing with. We dealt with probably 4 or 5 bears that were 450 pounds plus this year in campgrounds. And the average below that was about 350 pounds. I dealt with a female out behind the school. She was 380 pounds. We generally don't see females that big. in this area. It's the first one I've seen of that size. But that was generally, like I say, it was almost to a bear. That was the class of animals we were dealing with.
Does dog food grow a bigger bear?
Nutrient-rich food will definitely increase the bear size. If they're getting a lot of grub and a lot of calories, and dog food does have that in it, or fruit, high volumes of fruit, things like that, the bears do get larger quicker, for sure.
To prevent, to mitigate break-ins to vehicles and people's homes and damage to property, will you suggest as an option is to feed the bears to prevent this from happening? No,
not at all. 100% no. That is just going to prolong and continue the problem. Once you start feeding a bear, they're opportunistic. They identify a food source, so he's going to identify that feeding as where he gets his food. Other bears are going to key in on that, and then it's going to perpetuate the problem. Sooner or later, there isn't going to be enough food there for them, because nobody can put out enough food to keep those bears happy. And I think it's a pretty good example when we look at some of the numbers we've dealt with historically at the lake, and all of a sudden a very large food source was removed. And we ended up with a very severe barrier as far as safety issues, property damage, and encounters with bears. Not to mention that it is illegal to feed wild dangerous wildlife, which is the backside of this, right? The province has initiated legislation to prohibit feeding, and now is actually expanding it, because as we stand today, the laws basically deal with the intentional feeding of wildlife, or leaving out attractants for wildlife. There's going to be a new section of the Wildlife Act that deals with failing to manage attractants, which is going to apply to fruit left to rot on the tree or fall on the ground, putting out the wrong substances in the compost, leaving pet food out to feed pets after bears have started to frequent your property or cause damage, and things like that. So that is going to be another aspect of the Wildlife Act that we're going to have to deal with these issues.
I was just wondering about the huckleberry crop. There doesn't seem to be much enough that we can do anything about that, but the huckleberry crop seems to be down a lot. Is that part of the reason that the bears are driving?
Did everybody hear that question?
Yeah.
He's asking about the huckleberry crop.
And that is it. That's a great question. It's a huge issue with what we end up dealing with going into the summer. And those natural food sources that we saw a poor crop this year for sure. And we noticed that right away. But when those bears don't have that start with the natural food sources, or those sources don't develop even as they move into the summer, that takes them into high gear that they've got to find other sources, right? And that is another big factor that we felt affected the lake this year, is that it was kind of twofold. That there was an unnatural food source that kind of went away, plus the natural food source wasn't there to sort of to pillow the impact of that. So when that happened, you had the perfect storm of them coming out of out of the hills looking for food. And all of a sudden they went from a very non-competitive environment, there was always enough food for everybody, to a very competitive environment. And then that pushed them into places we really didn't want to see them.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much, Jerry.